everyone, and welcome back to OTTB On Tap. I'm Niamh.
And I'm Emily. Hey, Niamh, what's on tap today?
Sorry, I just...
See, you can't even say it.
No, well, I just read what you just said as you were saying it, and I think I've been watching too many psychological thrillers. Honestly, I feel like I'm in two worlds at the same time.
Is that the topic of our podcast today? That's what's on tap? Inside Niamh's brain?
Nobody needs to go in there. It's a dark and mysterious place. Okay.
No comment.
Hi, dear listeners. You asked and we answered. We love getting feedback about topics you'd like for us to cover. And, oh, for fuck's sake. Sorry.
What's the matter?
Outlook just chimed in. Whatever, I'm going to retake that. But I need to see what...
Well, I'm still going to laugh at you.
Dear listeners, you asked and we answered. We love getting feedback about topics you'd like for us to cover, and one of the things that we see over and over again are queries about pedigree. We thought it would be super helpful to also look at the horse's conformation and make some connections between their breeding and how they're put together. And finally, Emily and I are going to guess what we think the horse would be like to ride, which discipline it's probably suited for, and more.
We hope you all enjoy this series as much as we've enjoyed prepping for it. Please remember, this is only for fun, and these are only mine and Niamh's opinions that we have gathered from our experience and our research. A lot of people say you don't ride the bloodlines or the conformation, and there's always exceptions to every rule, especially with off-track thoroughbreds. This is just intended to be educational and entertaining. Also, please make sure to check out our website, www.ottbontap.com, to sign up for our newsletter, and you'll be the first to know about bonus content, upcoming episodes, and more.
We've formatted this series in a way that we hope translates really well to podcast format, but because it's not a visual format, we're going to make sure to include confirmation pics, details, and links to information that we gathered as well on our website and under the corresponding episode show notes.
Yes, and we'll mention the horse by its Jockey Club name, talk about their race history and breeding, and then Niamh and I will give our unique thoughts about their conformation. We actually have not shared this with each other, by the way. We've written up our own top secret evaluations, so we don't know what the other one thinks. And also wanted to clarify, to make it even more fun, we asked listeners on Facebook if they would submit a confirmation photo and a Jockey Club name. So that is what we're going off of. 1 to 2 confirmation photos. I think one horse we have 1 photo. The other 2 we have 2 photos. And their Jockey Club name. We haven't gotten any information from their owners. And all of these horses were submitted by their current owners for evaluation. Side note, if you'd like to submit for an upcoming episode, let us know. Anyway, first up, we have a thoroughbred named Baybuilt.
So he's a 12-year-old bay gelding bred in Maryland. Baybuilt's racing record shows that he competed 10 times with just 1 win. His speed figure only spiked during that 1 victory, and I think it was like maybe 84, which is still pretty low for a racehorse. And it's not uncommon for horses that didn't find a lot of success at the track to only have 1 or 2 high speed figures. And speed figures are a number that's calculated based on an algorithm. So it's based on the time it takes for the horse to complete a race, the track conditions. There's a couple of different ways that they figure out that number, but it basically reflects the performance on a given day. And his other races show that he was actually quite slow.
Interestingly, looking at his pedigree, first glance, I see that there's no inbreeding through the 5th cross, which is really a positive sign for genetic diversity. I tend to lean, it's funny, when I look back at horses I've liked in the past, they often have little to no inbreeding. I don't know if there's a connection there, but just something interesting to note, as most of this is. He was never sold at auction. He seems to have stayed with his breeder, Lindy Clark, throughout his entire racing career. And a little shout out, we do know Lindy personally, and she is a wonderful representative of the Off-Track Thoroughbreds, so thanks for all that you do. But it's interesting to share that his sire, Love of Money, has such a strong pedigree. He was a standout, winning the Grade 2 Pennsylvania Derby, and he defeated horses like Tappet and Pollard's Vision. He only lived to be 11, but made an impact with his limited foal crops. Sired 26 winners from 84 foals, with progeny earnings over $1.5 million. Also, a little side note, if you listen to last week's episode 41, Love of Money was the sire of my 2013 RRP makeover horse, Victory Money, or Prima. And so if you want to hear a little bit about her and her traits and maybe see how they compare to Baybuilt, you can listen to our last episode, 41, Selecting and Training an OTTB for the Pimlico Showcase.
I think it's safe to say that you have quite a soft spot for that particular line.
Yes, she's one of my favorite horses of all time. So it's pretty cool. And since he did have, unfortunately, a limited breeding career, you don't see them all that often. So when he popped up, I was like, oh, this is fun.
Yeah, it was really cool. So Love of Money's sire, Not for Love, was quite a big deal in Maryland. After retiring from a successful racing career of his own under trainer Graham Motion, he became Maryland's leading sire for 9 consecutive years at Northview Stallion Station. He did not sire any Grade 1 winners, but his offspring were tough and durable, though often known for being quirky.
Yeah. And I actually didn't know that he raced under Graham Motion.
I know. I was excited when I saw that.
Who is fairly local to us at Fair Hill. Not for Love was part of the Mr. Prospector sire line, which has a legacy in Maryland. The influence of Northern Dancer, who stood at Winfield's farm, also helped boost the sire line success in the region. Not for Love's bloodline is notable for sport horses, too. He was the broodmare sire of California Chrome, who most of you probably recognize, a big name in recent years.
And not to forget Baybuilt's Dam, Royal Roughneck. She's by Mech, I think is how you say it. It's Mecke, who was a notable racehorse in her own right with earnings over $2.5 million.
Going back to the mare side, Baybuilt also carries the influence of Smarten through his Dam's lineage. Smarten was known for his toughness and consistency. Although he wasn't the best of his crop, he always gave his best and passed on those qualities to his progeny. His most significant contribution is probably through his daughter, Classy and Smart, the Dam of Smart Strike, a 2-time champion sire.
And I think it's just interesting looking at his pedigree as a whole and just making some initial thoughts about this horse. The breeding there on both sides, the dam and the sire line, there's a lot of fast horses, really good sought after sport horse connections there. So already before I even saw a picture of the horse, I had an idea of what I thought this horse might be all about.
So as I already said, Love of Money was the sire of one of my all-time favorite personal horses, and I'm very partial to this horse. Having said that, we all know the sire is only half of the pedigree, and often the dam is thought to be more influential to the offspring's temperament. On the sire side, Not for Love is very sought after for great temperament and making good sport horses. I also like to see Smarten in the lineup when I'm looking at a pedigree. On the dam side, I really actually admit to not being super knowledgeable about most of the names on the dam side. I do love that there's no inbreeding, as I mentioned before, and also Foolish Pleasure and Baldski lead themselves to athleticism. And I also looked up to see if Cherokee Fellow is related to Cherokee Run, but it isn't.
Sometimes those names can send you down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. And even before looking at the horse's conformation, I would expect, just from the breeding, though, just from what I can gather and read from that pedigree, I would expect this horse to be a good all-around prospect with nice movement.
Awesome. Let's get into the assessment. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to go through 8 different topics concerning conformation. So we've got overall balance, head and neck, shoulder, wither, humerus, back, hindquarters, legs, hooves, if we can see them, and our final impressions. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what job we think this horse might like to do. So, Emily, do you want to take it away with overall balance of Baybuilt?
Yes, let's see what we both thought. It's like we have to reveal our answers.
I know.
So first of all, overall balance. I want to say overall impressions that this is a nice photograph to evaluate. The horse is in a balanced position. It's on level ground and it's perpendicular to the camera, which always helps when you're trying to judge things like angles and overall proportions so that you don't have one part of the horse that's facing away from the camera and one part that's closer. As you all know, when you're taking a photo, if you want to be smaller, you get in the back, right? The same thing applies. But he appears to have a lovely overall balance. And overall, I think he has a very compact feel. You can see that his head and neck, shoulder, and hind quarter all feel very balanced. None of those areas seeming larger or smaller or more powerful or weaker than the others in general. How about you?
My first impressions were a nice looking horse overall. I said that the sire lineage has created a strong stamp here. I think that there are many love of money, not for loves that have this signature look about them. I would say that if we put a confirmation photo of Prima and this horse side by side, you'd see a lot of similarities.
Yeah, and we can do that.
Yeah, we can. And I said that he doesn't look to be super tall. I'd guess he's about 16 hand, 16'1".
Yeah, it's really hard to judge size from a photo with nothing else in it.
Yeah.
But he feels compact.
Yeah.
So however that large he actually is, I had the same feeling that he was probably about that size. And Prima's about 16'1". She might be 16'2" now. But when I had her, I think she was closer to 16'1".
Yeah.
So just from my kind of historical knowledge, that's where I would place him.
Moving on now to topic number 2, head and neck. What are your impressions?
Yeah, Baybuilt's head looks to be an appropriate size for his body.
Which I know sounds silly, but like you do see horses that you're like, that head seems a little small for that body.
He's got a really nice expression. His ears are pricked, which is always nice to see, though very tough to get in a confirmation photo, as we all know. I think that his neck, in proportion to his body, is a good length, and I like the angle of his neck. I think he'd be a horse that would feel balanced in front of you, and he'd also be able to make a nice outline for dressage. His neck also ties into his chest nice and high, which is something that sport horse breeders are looking for more and more. It should give him that nice neck set and good freedom through his shoulder.
I just want to say here, as I add my notes, I'm not going to repeat any comments that are redundant because Emily basically honed my eye for me. So there are going to be things that we're both going to repeat. And just for the sake of our listeners, I won't be.
She's copying me.
I looked in the notes and just changed.
No.
Yeah. So I said that he's got an intelligent and a keen expression. I said, I think this horse might be a little on the cocky side, but enjoys work. He just looks like the type that,
keen.
Yeah, he just looks keen. Okay, what are we doing? We're doing confirmation photos? All right, cool. Now, it would be interesting to find out how many it took to get this beautiful photo that was submitted, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
I said he's got a bit of a thick throat latch, which might lead me to believe that he's an occasional cribber. It's not super pronounced where I would make a guess that he's an actual cribber, but it could just be the shadow because there is a dark shadow on the photo. But it is something that you can sometimes make a guess at in a photo. Yeah.
I did notice that too. I didn't write it down. But.
Yeah. It's just one of those things that I think when you're looking at confirmation, you're looking for a lot of the good, right? You're trying to find out all of the things that are really, special about the horse. But then you're also looking for some things that you're like, I don't know if I like that.
Also, just clues. One of the very first horses I bought off the racetrack, I bought him. Saw him in a stall. He had no cribbing collar on. Bought him, got him shipped. And I was boarding him at the time. And the barn owner called me and was like, your horse cribs. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was very adverse to cribbing, I think. So luckily, I got a cribbing collar very fast and it was fine. But it's just something to put in your arsenal to maybe ask about.
But when you look at the other photo of him, I see it again in that photo a little bit, but it also could be that he trained in a way that he just had a bit of an overdeveloped under neck muscle, which is pretty common as well.
Or it could just be how he's made.
Yeah, exactly.
Also possible.
Yeah.
Moving on to the shoulder wither area, I think he has a lovely shoulder with a nice upright humerus, which is something that I learned to look for from Jimmy Wofford. I actually have his book here, and I wanted to read a little quote. It's Training the 3-Day Event Horse and Rider. And he says, the shoulder should join a long and rather upright humerus. An upright humerus has extensive forward movement, which allows free motion for galloping and jumping. And that's something that over the years, when you look at a horse on the ground and then you see it move and jump, will start to really stand out for you. And it's one of the biggest things that I look for. I'm going to draw on the photos. and accompany the website with that. So you can take a look there as well. I think his wither is not super pronounced, especially for a thoroughbred, which doesn't really mean anything one way or another to me. I just thought it was of note, and it goes along with his like overall compact. There's nothing that stands out as exaggerated about this horse to me. And I think that the wither isn't super size scraper high or anything like that. So it fits in there.
Yeah, like you said, he's not super angular where you can see every little sharp turn on his body. But that being said, the way that this photograph was taken and the way that the shadows and highlights are, it's almost a perfect candidate for drawing on a photo because you can literally see like the outline of the bones and the shapes of the muscles on top of those. So having that humorous, like you said, also creates this beautiful shoulder muscle connection. And he's got a nice long radius and short cannon bones, which is something that you taught me to look for. So that in combination with the angle of his shoulder would suggest that like he can snap those legs up if he needs to and probably has pretty good freedom of his shoulders on the flat.
It's so funny you said that because in a couple minutes, I'm going to have a direct contradiction to you. But let's go on.
What Emily and I like in horses is going to differ from sometimes.
Yeah.
All right.
So back. What do you think about his back? I'm going to put you in the hot seat.
All right. I said overall, he's got a very well-developed top line. It looks nice and strong. He doesn't have a super set back wither, but it's set back enough that I feel like you'll feel like the horse is out in front of you. And he's got a big, strong shoulder, which has nothing to do with his back, but I'm going off course now. But I did say that I would be very curious to know if this owner has struggled at all with saddle fit because of where his back kind of starts and how developed his front end is. He's got a very powerful front end.
Yeah, I was similar in that I think his back looks well muscled. It's an appropriate length for his overall proportions. I felt a little bit the opposite, though. I don't think it's too short. Like, I think sometimes you get a horse with a huge shoulder and a really short back. And because his wither isn't set back super far, I don't think it would really cause too many issues. However, having said that, I am not a saddle fitter, but I think his back is appropriate for the horse.
Yeah. And the owner's done a beautiful job developing his top line because we have a photo of him from 30 days off the track. And this is a more recent photo. And you can really see that she's put a lot of time and energy into developing that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's pretty cool to see that before and after.
It really is, yeah.
So as far as his hindquarters, I think he has a strong hindquarter. I always look for the triangle between the point of the hip, the point of the buttock, and the stifle. And I will draw that on the image.
His is almost, you can almost see a perfect triangle there.
Yeah, it's a totally equilateral triangle, which is, I think, often preferred. If I'm going to pick for a side to be longer, I would like the line from the point of hip to the point of buttock to be the longer side and be a little shorter between the point of hip and the point of stifle. But his is perfect, so there's no reason to really argue with that. But again, looks really well muscled. Looks like he has plenty of power there and matches the rest of his body.
So I said that we've got two pictures of this horse, one from when he was 30 days off the track, like I mentioned, and a more recent photo. And I mentioned my overall impression of him was that he was a sturdy type of horse. But when you look at the picture of him from 30 days off the track, he's got a fairly undeveloped musculature from his stifle down to his hock. And I was actually making my comments primarily off of the newer photo. And I said, oh, it looks like maybe he's a little weak there from stifle to hock over his gaskin. And then when I looked at the photo from when he was right off the track, my kind of curiosity was satisfied there because he does look like he was a little weak behind. So again, to piggyback on what I said about this horse's top line, this horse has been ridden very correctly to develop a strong, powerful hind end that you can see is structurally there, but they've clearly worked on it.
I said that I would prefer to see his hocks a tad lower set and with a shorter hind cannon bone to allow him to really reach under himself easily and push off with that powerful hindquarter. So I don't think there's anything really wrong. It's just my personal preference. And I think it just isn't, he might not find it as easy to engage and push off as he might be if his hocks were a little bit lower set.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's anything that would impact his soundness or career choice or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I feel like if he was going to be a jumping horse, you would maybe see it in his form in some way, shape, or form there. All right, let's move on to legs.
So his front legs, I think, look very straight from the side, not over or behind the knee. He's got lovely pasterns, not too short or too long. His angle matches his hooves. If I were to comment here, I would say that maybe I feel like his cannons could be a little bit shorter, much as I said, on his hind legs in proportion to his forearm. So I would expect him to have a touch of knee action in his gaits, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you're looking for a horse that has that really low sweeping movement, you would want a shorter cannon and a longer forearm.
Yeah.
Than what I think he has.
Yeah. I feel like
Again,
that.
I've never seen him move. So
I feel like that knee action is coming back into style in terms of what dressage judges are liking. And I know you've mentioned it a couple times. You're like, if I had Alex now, I would have gotten rewarded for that movement. His hind leg, I thought, again, it looked a bit weak from stifle to hock. I agree with your comment about the hock could be a little bit lower set. It's hard to tell from this particular angle because of how he stood up. I'd like it if his legs were in the opposite direction, but his pasterns behind look a touch longer than I would like because of how his hind cannon bones are structured, but it could just be the angle. And I think I said something similar. I felt like him pushing from behind would be a little bit challenging for him, which is actually might be why he had a bit of a weaker Gaskin. So,
yeah, I didn't actually notice that about his hind pasterns, but now that I'm looking, I see that.
And it could just be the way that he's standing because he's not totally square with the leg that's closest to us, and it's just a little bit tricky to tell. Again, these are just our impressions from one or two photos. So, and then let's move on to feet.
Yeah, I think he has a very solid hoof, and he looks barefoot.
That's what I was thinking.
Which is a tough thing for a lot of OTTBs. He's also standing on gravel or pavement. So kudos to the owner.
Yeah.
Has plenty of heel. His pasterns appear to match his hoof angles well. So I don't see anything alarming from looking at his feet. Looks like they've been really well taken care of.
Yeah, I would love to know more about the transition that they've gone through from, because you can't see them in the 30-day off the track photo. So I'm really curious, did he come with a good heel? Was there much work involved there? And I'd love to hear the farrier's perspective on keeping this horse. I know this horse is based, I think, in Maryland, and up in our area, the ground can be pretty punishing. It can go from very wet to very hard quickly. Yeah, really good angles all around. The front feet and the back feet look, he's just got 4 really nice looking feet. So yeah, congratulations.
And what are your final overall impressions about the horse?
So I said, I think this horse would thrive in many disciplines. I said lateral work might come a little easier than collection based on his build. I think he's probably a good mover with a strong work ethic. Based on his family genes, he's probably got a good gallop and probably moves easily across the ground.
Interesting. I said, overall, I really like this horse. Obviously, I'm partial to the breeding from my old horse by the same sire, but it's so cool to see another one. From this photo, I think he'd be a really balanced horse to ride with a good canter and a good front end over the fences.
Basically, we really like your horse.
Yeah. Can we steal him?
To be fair, Emily and I are probably going to everybody's horse for the most part. Oh, I did want to mention here really quickly, we are toying with the idea of doing some follow-ups on some of these horses. So if you are an owner of one of the horses that we're speaking about, please reach out to us again and let us know if you would like to do a little follow-up with us. So next up, we have Floo Powder, who is a 13-year-old gray gelding bred in PA. He had an unremarkable race record with only 5 starts, hitting the board a few times and winning about $9,000. I was looking at Floo Powder's pedigree, and I have to say it's really impressive. Both the sire and dam lines are packed with famous names and influential horses. His sire line is especially notable.
Yeah, his sire exchange rate was quite the star. He was a graded stakes winner and an extremely successful stallion, siring 68 stakes winners. He was purchased as a yearling at Keelan for $1.4 million back in 1998,
Wow.
and known for being a classy, well-structured horse. This is the sire, not Floo Powder.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. Known for being a classy, structured horse, passed on power and competitiveness to his offspring, whether on dirt or turf.
Yeah, exactly. An exchange rate was by Danzig, who is practically legendary in the thoroughbred world. Born in 1977, Danzig was a powerhouse sire, producing 188 graded stakes winners and 10 Eclipse Award winners, with earnings surpassing $100 million. He also sired Dane Hill, who became the first thoroughbred stallion to sire 300 stakes winners.
I love both Danzig and Dane Hill. And remember learning about Danzig and how influential he was. He had a strong resemblance to his sire, Northern Dancer, though Danzig had a bit more scope. He only stood at 15-3 hands and had some physical issues like being light on bone and having offset knees, which ended his racing career and sometimes appeared in his progeny.
But despite those knee issues, he passed on a sense of power, balance, and speed. Danzig was highly intelligent, but also territorial, allegedly, especially about his paddock, though he mellowed with age. And I think the territorial attitude might have even contributed to his competitive nature.
Yeah, for sure. And looking at the dam line, it's just as remarkable. He's out of La Wildcat, who's by Forest Wildcat. Forest Wildcat was hugely successful sire with 678 foals, and 379 of them turned out to be winners. That's more than $34 million in earnings.
Wow. And of course, Forest Wildcat was by Notorious Stormcat, another iconic name. He was foaled at Dairy Meeting Farm and trained by Jonathan Shepard. Fun fact here, Emily and I used to rent this particular farm at Dairy Meeting. And we were pretty excited when we moved in and they let us know that Danzig was foaled there and Stormcat was foaled there and many other notable horses. Influence as a sire was massive, and his stud fee at its peak was $500,000. Stormcat produced 108 stakes winners and was known for his good hip and solid build, though he had a little bit of a fiery temperament.
Yeah, I've heard about that. And I know that, I'll talk about this in a minute, but people tend to feel very polar about Stormcat. They either love him or hate him in a pedigree.
Yeah.
But he was described as having a strong competitive instinct. His offspring were sometimes considered mad by top trainers like Aidan O'Brien that did not have a sense of self-preservation, but were fast and powerful, which is likely what made them stand out on the track.
That's really, they had a lack of self-preservation.
Yeah.
I feel like some of the best horses are that way, though.
Could be.
Exactly. Stormcat also passed on some of his physical traits like offset knees, but he gave his progeny a lot of tenacity and ability. It's that combination of attitude, strong conformation, and competitive drive that made him such a successful sire.
For sure. And when I took a look at his pedigree, the first thing I noticed was Danzig up close. And I was like, okay, I'd expect him to have a little bit of fire to him. And then I saw the Forest Wildcat and Stormcat. And I thought, okay, if you couple the Danzig and the Stormcat, I wouldn't expect him to be the type that a beginner would necessarily be wanting to choose as their first restart, or someone new to OTTBs.
Yeah.
But I will bet he's a fierce competitor, brave, and tough.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of other names in the pedigree that are quite far back, but he also has Theatrical and Conquistador Cielo. Mm-hmm. And they are both names that are standouts to me in terms of athleticism. And if I see those names, I'm usually pretty happy and interested in the horse.
Yeah.
I would expect him to be very smart, tough horse that is quick off the aids, but also very loyal to those that he knows and trusts.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that I know that like I've said about Stormcats before, and we disagree here, but they can be a little tougher in terms of partnering with them. But I feel like once you build that solid connection, they can be like your ride or die. They're great partners.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll dig deep for you.
For sure. Yeah, I think especially you got a really good one, then you will be a convert to Stormcat.
Yes.
So let's dig into the conformation. Do you want to go first with your overall first impression and balance?
Initially, I had one picture to work with, but then you found another picture. My overall balance was that he was slightly a downhill build with a powerful hind end and hip that possibly overpowers the front end.
Yes. I felt that he appears to be well balanced in terms of between his head and neck, shoulder and hindquarter, in terms of like, I think the overall proportion.
Yeah.
He's also the best stood up of the three horses. I know the picture of Baybuilt is probably a little bit more attractive because the sun's shining and his coat is glossy, but this horse has his hind legs in a better position so you can see them a bit more, although his feet are in the grass. So can't have everything. But I did note that his hind end does appear to be just a bit higher than his withers, which really is not uncommon in off-track thoroughbreds. Like, remember, they're bred to run fast, mostly straight lines with wide turns. They're not bred to jump big fences or perform upper-level dressage movements. I'll say that while many might fault this, I've seen plenty of off-track thoroughbreds that are a bit high behind but have no issue carrying themselves and being quite light on the forehand. So I would say this is the case of kind of conformation is as conformation does.
Yeah.
And for certain types of riding and disciplines, this might actually be desired. Think about how a typical quarter horse is put together. That's a bit what my first impression of this horse was.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then moving on to the head and neck, what did you think?
I said he has a workman-like head. It's a little bit blocky through his muzzle, but he has a really kind eye. He's got a huge, big, kind eye and big, honest ears. So really cute and endearing. I do think his neck is actually set pretty well, despite being a little bit higher behind. It has a good length to it when you look at his overall kind of body. I'd like to see how he carries himself when he moves. I'd be really interested to see that. He might go a little low in front, but sometimes they surprise you. What about you?
Yeah, I think I said this horse has a really sweet expression and it gives me the feeling of an old soul.
Yeah.
There is just something about the look in his eye where he just seems like he's been around the world already.
Yeah, no, he looks really like a really cool horse.
I like how the top of his neck connects into his wither and his back. And I think that, like you said, thinking about how he might move might be interesting because the connection in front in his chest is not what I would say would be ideal, but he might surprise us and actually be quite elegant in the way that he holds his front end.
Yeah, agree. I think in terms of his shoulder, again, we have a horse with a nice shoulder. He's got a lovely upright humerus. I'd prefer his actual scapula to be a bit longer and attached to a more prominent setback wither, especially if he was a horse that you wanted to go and jump big fences on or something like that. But I still think he looks plenty capable.
Yeah, I actually said that, and I think it was because I only had the one photo initially, but I said the photo was a little tricky to evaluate because in the one photo, he almost looks like he's standing over his shoulder a little bit. But I said that I'd like to see the wither set back a little bit more, but he does look to have an actual strong shoulder, especially in the second photo. You can see how the muscles have developed over there, and
it's hard on grays to really evaluate sometimes.
Yeah,
especially from a photograph.
And then moving on to the back, I said that he's got a good length of back with a nicely developed top line, his deep heart girth, and I said I would suspect that this horse swings nicely over his back.
That's an interesting observation.
What do you think?
I said his back looks appropriate.
That's it?
No. Oh. But I also started looking at him a bit harder, and looking at him overall, he's the type of horse, I feel like you have horses that fit into a square or horses that fit into a rectangle, like a rectangular box or a square box. And he's more of that rectangle. So he's a bit longer with shorter legs. Not that he has short legs, but he's definitely more of that rectangular shape.
Yes.
So it goes along with my initial impressions that he might travel a bit low and long throughout his body.
And then what did you think about the hindquarters?
He also has that nice equilateral triangle that I look for. I think on him, though, I'd prefer, because he's shaped a bit differently than our first horse overall. I would like there to be a little bit more length between that point of hip and point of buttock, but I am being very picky when I say that because he has basically a perfect triangle there.
Yeah. I said I love this horse's hind end, and the Danzig stamp really shows here. Danzig had an extremely robust hind end that just looked very strong. It was in these two photos of this horse, like his whole outline of his hindquarters just looks very strong and well developed. Yeah. He's got a well-defined rump and flank. Looks to be quite powerful.
Yeah, for sure. What did you think about his legs?
I probably got it wrong again, but for his front legs, I said he's got a nice long radius and short cannon bones. And with the shoulder angle, I think he would rotate pretty well over fences. If I had to fault them, I would say his legs could be a little bit longer in front. Mm-hmm. And then his hind legs, again, I really like his hind leg. The connection between his gaskin, stifle, and hock is long and sweeping. And I bet he's got great push from behind. So, again, we disagree a little bit. It's funny. In the photo with the sunset in the background, which you mentioned earlier, he's standing a bit over his shoulder. And that, I feel like his front legs look straight. But when you see that photo where he's standing over his shoulder, that can actually make horses look a little bit over at the knee, but I do think that's just how he's standing. On a side note, I personally feel like if I had to choose for a conformation fault, over at the knee would be probably one of them that wouldn't bother me unless it was really severe. A lot of the old time trainers and riders used to actually seek that out if they were looking for a jumper, but not saying that this horse has that. It's just how he looks in the one photo. Yeah. Hind legs. I actually think he looks a bit light through his gaskin, which is a bit surprising as he looks well muscled elsewhere throughout his body. And I would prefer a lower set hock on him. And he has a really open hock angle. It looks almost straight behind, which I feel like might hinder his ability to really collect and push. But again, it's the sort of thing you would have to look at and see him move. Yeah, and I feel like when you think of the mechanics of how all those pieces move together, sometimes they can look like they have a really powerful hind step, and it just happens to be the way that the leg is put together. And sometimes they can have a less dramatic looking step, but actually like a lot of push from behind. So it is really tricky to tell sometimes. And then what did you think about his feet? Yeah, it was really hard to evaluate. The first photo we got, he's standing in grass, so you really can't see them. The second photo with the sunset in the background, they look decent and well-shaped. That was about as much as I could really tell. Yeah, I just said he looks to have a good enough foot, but he might still be working on transitioning into a new career. That his pastern angles all around look a little bit long, but they may improve as the heels grow out more and support the leg. So I think he'd be an interesting horse to see in another 6 months or 12 months and see how that shakes out. Yeah, I think too, I feel like his hind pasterns are a bit long, especially in that sunset photo. Yeah. But overall, I really like the energy I get from this horse. He really, for some reason, I just get this feeling that he's a trier. I think with his slightly higher hindquarter and his hocks being slightly higher set, something like upper level collection for dressage might be tough for him, but I bet he has good quick speed and he's super handy to ride and turn. And to me, he just screams Western to me. When I first saw him, I kept comparing him to a quarter horse in my brain. And I can just picture him jogging and loping in Western tack, but also turning up the heat for the speed events. So I would think that he's quick and smart and tough, but maybe doesn't have the biggest, loftiest stride in the world. I said that I like this horse a lot. He reminds me a lot of my first Thoroughbred that had some similar qualities of a quarter horse. That's funny. Yeah, the more I looked at him, he just really reminds me of my first horse, Riley. And I said, I guess he's a good mover and presents a very nice picture under tack. He looks like he could jump well, and I think he might make a nice hunter or a lower level eventer. Cool. So it's interesting to hear our takeaways because there's plenty of overlap, but there are some strong differences as well. And I hope that our listeners find that interesting. All right. We've got one more. Yes. Who do we have now? Let's see. Sorry, I'm not following the outline. I'm going off script. Uh-oh.
Last but not least, we have Dragon Moon, a Kentucky bred 9-year-old gelding. So I was looking into his pedigree, and it is just full of big names. Super Saver, Maria's Mon, AP Indy, and even Buck Passer. And I'll mention a few others in a minute, but really just jam-packed with heavy hitters, both for racing and sport horses.
Yeah, I'll say that all three of these horses were really fun to look at, because not that it won't be fun to look up horses that have a more unique background with maybe some sires and dams that we haven't heard of before, but these horses just kept getting nicer than the next. I couldn't believe it. So Super Saver definitely stands out since he won the Kentucky Derby, so I think people know his name. I saw that Dragon Moon's dam, Lunar Gal, is by Yes It's True, who is a major player in the breeding world. He didn't have any Mr. Prospector, Northern Dancer, or Seattle Slew in his bloodline, which is pretty rare, but his progeny still earned over 58 million and included more than 50 black type winners. And a black type winner is basically either a graded winner or a horse that has been decided on that it is a superior racehorse or breeding stock.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yes, it's true. Was known for passing on smooth, fluid movement to his offspring, which is a trait that people would really value, obviously. Super Saver, on the other hand, has a more delicate reputation. He was game, but eventually retired due to bone bruising on all 4 of his cannons. Still, he went on to have a solid stud career, standing in places like Australia, Argentina, and Turkey.
That's so interesting. When I was doing research for this episode, I was fascinated by the fact that I think because they thought he was just going to be such a good sire, they just shipped him all over the place. I also read that Super Saver passed on a kind, good-natured temperament to his progeny, which is always a plus. And as for Dragon Moon, he was sold at the Keeneland yearling auction for $140,000. And then at a Tattersall sale in Ireland as a 2-year-old for over $257,000.
Wow. A lot of money.
I learned about something new when I was researching this episode. I had never heard of the Tattersall's 2-year-old sale before, so I gave it a Google, and apparently they breeze the horse on the tracks so that potential buyers can see them gallop and observe their stride. And I thought that was really cool and unique. And then I found out that also happens in the U.S. And so I think it's, as Emily said, it's quite controversial because they're breezing these 2-year-olds at an extremely high rate of speed.
Yeah, always learning. But it is really cool, though, that he was overseas and he started his career in England and raced there for his first 8 starts. And then he was shipped to the U.S. in late 2018. But unfortunately, he never won a race here. His race record says he made around $1,400 per start over 27 races.
Yeah, I noticed that too. There's a small break in his record between 2020 and 2021, which may have been because of COVID. I think a lot of horses had pauses in their race schedules because of that. Yeah, I think it's interesting that he's bred to the 9s. And I think they really had high hopes for him. And it sounded like he started off pretty strong. And then by the time he made it to the US, just wasn't living up to the expectations, which is always interesting to see.
But when I looked at the pedigree, this is a horse I'd probably buy off of pedigree alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that he has very little inbreeding. His pedigree is packed with attractive names to me. And while none of them on their own probably stand out as a must buy, the combination just feels very pleasing. Mm-hmm. I love the Maria's Mon, Wavering Monarch line, as well as Cara, which is way far back there. I love to see that older Irish blood. AP Indy, who we haven't discussed, but he's always a beauty mark and a pedigree to me. Generally means great temperament and athletic, usually nice, substantial types of horses. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's true. I've always heard great things about as far as temperament and athleticism. And then the Quiet American Fabiano line is something I really like. Fabiano stands out to me for great movement. I know it's far back in this pedigree because year was he born? Like 77 or something like that.
31.
Yeah. But the Quiet American also, I feel like, adds in good temperament. So
yeah, he's bred to have a really good temperament on both sides.
Agree.
And it's unusual to see that many of those types all in one pedigree as well. But yeah, that's an excellent point about saying this is a horse you'd probably buy on pedigree and be like, at the very least, it's going to be nice to work with.
Yeah, agree.
Now to our assessment. I'm so curious about this one because I feel like you and I are going to have a lot of overlapping opinions, but you never know.
Are we? I don't know. We had some big surprises so far.
All right.
So let's see. As far as my like overall balance, I have to say that I have a suspicion that in real life, this horse is more balanced than he appears in the photo. We only have one photo of this horse. And as you'll be able to see when you take a look at it, his hindquarters are turned away from the photographer, which makes them appear smaller in proportion to his neck and back. His neck looks super long in this photo. But so while it's also a great example of how one photo can make a valuation tough and that first impressions count. However, since we have looked at thousands and thousands of horse photos, I feel like both of us, our brains can fill in the blank.
Yeah.
If you will, when you're looking at it. You're also a photographer and I have a design background. So I feel like we can
good at visualization. Yeah.
Yeah. We can rearrange stuff in our heads. And it's definitely something that is a practice learned skill. But yeah, so I have to say, if I was looking just at the photograph, I would say his hindquarter looks a bit smaller than his front end. His neck looks quite long. But I think if he was perpendicular to the photo, he would appear quite balanced.
Agree. I said it's not a traditional conformation pick. It looks like he's just out in his turnout paddock. So he's not standing as square correct as I would like, but I can use my imagination because I can already tell that he's put together with all the right parts.
Yes. So head and neck, he strikes me as having a very pleasant overall outlook. He's got larger ears and a very kind, substantial head. He has a lovely eye and his face appears in good proportion to the rest of him. He just looks like a good dude.
Yeah, I said I can't completely tell by this photo, but he looks to have a nice strong outline on his face. He's got large ears, which I have a big soft spot for. He's got a beautiful long neck, and although it's not super developed in this image, I can picture how it will improve over time.
I also added he has a long neck, which is great for the horse to be able to balance themselves. I personally like a horse with enough length of rein in front of me so I don't feel like I might topple off the front end.
Yes.
But I will say that his neck appears to be lower set in this photo, and where his neck ties into his chest and shoulder is quite low. So that could limit him a bit in his upward balance for things like upper level dressage or jumping. And maybe predispose him to be a little bit on his forehand kind of naturally.
Yeah.
But for a discipline like hunters, it might actually be the preferred neck set. I also thought on this horse that his throat latch area was a little bit thick and just a bit coarse where I could just see him wanting to lean a bit on his front end. It
is tricky because I think in this picture he's standing so over his shoulder and he's turned like from the beginning of his chest, he's turned away from us.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, I'd be so curious to see this horse stood up proper on a flat surface perpendicular because I think our whole opinion of him would probably shift a little bit. So maybe that's something we could ask the owner to update us with. That would be cool. I thought he had a really nice shoulder. If you look at Super Saver, he's like a carbon copy. We'll definitely include a picture of him. I said that he's got a very nice, highly sought after angle in his humerus, which could suggest that he can rotate and lift his front legs really well.
I agree that he's got a very nicely defined, very well shoulder, good angle between the scapula and the humerus. Though I still get that impression he's a bit heavy through the shoulder and forehand. Again, it might just be this photo and that point of his shoulder could be higher. I do think he'd have a really nice sweeping stride versus a ton of knee action. For jumping, I'd expect him to make a nice bascule over the jump, though maybe not be the snappiest or quickest with his front end.
Interesting. Going on to his back and his heart girth, he's got a nice short coupled build, which is a little bit hard to tell from this photo, but I'm going to make a guess there. He's got a deeply sprung rib cage, and I would guess that he probably feels pretty good to sit on.
Yes, I also commented on his well-sprung barrel that would take up leg well. I like the depth of that heart girth, and his back looks strong and really nicely muscled from this angle.
And then moving on to the hindquarters, I just said that of the 3 that we're evaluating today, this one has my favorite hind end with a low set hock, long gaskin, and well-developed hindquarters, which I know is putting it really simply, but that's just what I'm looking at.
Yeah. I said, I do wish that we had a photo of him more squared up and not leaning away from the camera, but I see a nice strong hindquarter with good angles from the point of the hip. Buttock and stifle, fairly equilateral, but I feel like he's got a little bit more length in there. And he gives an impression of just being very powerful through his hindquarter.
Yeah, agreed. And then moving on to his legs, his front legs, it's a little bit tricky to tell because he's got fly boots on.
Yeah.
But I do like his radius. It's just a little bit tricky because I can't really tell where his fetlock is. I think I like his front leg. I think I like his front legs. Yeah, I can only see like how long his radius is. And to me, that looks good. But it's hard to tell just how short the cannon bone is.
Yeah, I basically said the same thing. It's pretty impossible to tell with the fly boots on. He is standing over his shoulder in the photo. So a little bit like the last horse in the second photo of Floo Powder. It could make them appear a little bit over at the knee, but I don't think that he truly is. I think it's just how he's standing. For the hind legs, again, I like that low set hock, good and a good distance from stifle or hock. And I do see that in him in a moderate amount. Again, a little tough to evaluate, but I think that his hind end and hind leg should really supply sufficient power to move and jump well if that is his intended purpose.
Yeah, I said he's got very good hind legs that look to be very correct and supportive for his body type. He also has probably the best fetlock, pastern, hoof connection in his back legs, I think, of the 3 horses. But I'm judging that on one leg that's underneath of him. So again, that opinion could actually change quite drastically with a different photo.
Yeah, and he looks like he's got a nice heel, good hooves that seem to match nicely.
Yeah, I think I just said he's got pretty good looking feet. He is standing on stone dust, so it's a little bit tricky. And his front feet look like maybe they need a little bit more time to develop some heel. Again, it's a little bit tricky to tell.
What did you think overall?
I said this horse would thrive in many disciplines, but he says eventer to me. I bet he's got a super gallop and finds collection work easy. I would suspect he's really nice on the flat and he's an expressive jumper. My guess is by his build, he has a better than average walk and canter.
I said, this looks like a really pleasant horse. I bet he's a better than average mover and jumper. He may have a tendency to lean a bit on his forehand, though. And it's funny, I wrote part of this after just looking at his pedigree. And from there, I said, I'd expect this horse to be substantially built with an even temperament and above average movement with some loft to his gaits. I'd say he's probably a big and lofty jumper. I don't know if he's the quickest off the ground with his legs.
Yeah.
He'd make a really good eventer or dressage horse or maybe even a good show hunter.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I think of the 3, he's probably the most my type. If I had to pick one of the 3, though, I think I would also... I don't know. They're all nice. I can't really say that. There's something to like about all of them. And it's like you go from their expression to their, I don't know. There's just a lot to.
It's why the OTTBs are like potato chips.
This is true.
You can't choose or you can't eat just one.
Yeah.
Or choose
and
just
like
one. I know.
What you're looking for in one moment of your life can be so different over time. And you know, what you want when you're at a highly competitive point in your life might be totally different to what you're looking for when you work a 9-to-5 job and you have more limited time. And yes, conformation is a big part of what makes up their suitability and soundness, and their pedigree does play into their personality, sometimes their attitude about work and things like that. There's just so many factors that make up each of these horses.
Yeah. And I don't know what I'm trying to say. No, I think originally I was like, oh, maybe we can rank them for a second and third like they used to do in the old Conformation clinic. But yeah. I think that would be so hard to do because we're looking at a breed, but a breed that's so versatile and horses can be built in so many different ways and do well at so many different things.
Yeah.
So I feel like it would really be hard to do that with this group of horses.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate the point that we're certainly not comparing these horses to one another in terms of this one's better or this one's not as good or anything like that. But like, we just really want to compare them to their pedigree and their race record and use that as our guide for our final evaluations. And we really hope that you guys like this series so far. If you have any opinions or feedback about anything that you'd like us to include, please let us know. We got around 40 submissions so far, so we're going to start incorporating this segment into our schedule. We may even make this Patreon-only content at some point. Oh, I mentioned this before, but we would love if you hear your horse mentioned on the podcast, if you'd reach out to us and maybe we can see how close we were on some of our guesses. So if you guys think that'll be fun, leave us a comment. Do you have anything to add, Emily?
No, this is something we've wanted to do for a really long time. And we've been overwhelmed with the response. We would love more submissions. Send us your photo and your Jockey Club name, and maybe you will see your horse in an upcoming episode.
To reiterate what Emily was saying before about, especially with the last horse and how he was stood up for a photo, we are working on some special content that we're going to release over the next 6 months that will include some things about how you can really change the impression of a horse based on how you stand it up for conformation. And we've got lots of things in the pipeline. We tend to get a little bit excited about things when you guys get excited. So that's actually why this episode is coming out a couple of days late, because we went down a research rabbit hole and came out and realized it was Monday. And so we hope that you appreciate the time and effort that went into us doing that. And let us know if you would prefer to hear the podcast on Tuesdays versus Thursdays, because we're thinking about mixing it up, but nothing concrete yet.
If you like what you heard today, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow OTTB on Tap on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and contact us with interview candidates and topic suggestions at OTTBontap.com. We love hearing from you.
Bye.